Famous Pianists and Their Technique, Chapter 3, The Beginnings of the Piano, summary by Laura Aguirre. The evolution of the piano starts with its hammer action. This is what makes the piano different from a harpsichord. The hammer action can be traced back to the invention of the pantalone, and this was invented by a gentleman named Pantaleon Hebenstreit around 1690. It was a dulcimer-like instrument where you would use little hammers to play on the strings. I provided a picture of what it might have looked like back in the 1600s. Bartolomeo Cristofori is credited with the invention of the first piano. This was around 1709, and he called his instrument a gravicembalo col pianoforte, which means a harpsichord with soft and loud. As we know, the harpsichord didn't have much of a dynamic range. It was not touch sensitive the way our present day piano is. So Mr. Cristofori wanted to add some dynamic range. He invented an escapement action which allowed the hammer to fall back from the string to allow it to continue to ring. This action also helped for fast repetition of notes. Here there's a picture of one of his existing pianos from 1720, and it is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And for fun here, I included two pictures of my trip to New York back in 2008, where I visited the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I got to see Bartolomeo's piano firsthand. As you can see, that's me standing next to it. It is quite tiny, definitely not a huge instrument, not the way we picture our grand pianos today. And my apologies for the blurry picture, but it was quite fascinating to stand next to this wonderful bit of history. So Cristofori was the Italian that invented the first piano, but it was Gottfried Silbermann, a German harpsichord maker, who perfected or continued to perfect the instrument. He was working on one of these instruments that of course was inspired by Cristofori's original, and he wanted Bach to try out the instrument. This was around 1736. And we have an account here from Johann Friedrich Agricola, who wrote a treatise on the organ and other instruments, and he gave an account of what Bach thought about this piano, this new pianoforte, and he said that Bach said he had praised indeed and admired its tone, but he had complained that it was too weak in the higher register and was too hard to play. Too hard to play meaning the action was too heavy. So apparently Silbermann took this a little personally and was a little upset with Bach for the time, but then realized that Bach was probably right, and he worked on the instrument some more, and he ended up giving one to the King of Prussia, who here they say on page 37 that His Majesty was most gracious with his approval of this instrument. He then decided, all right, let me have Bach try it out again, and of course Bach also was very happy with the changes of the instrument. However, I know Bach was more harpsichord player, so this must have been a really cool experience to try out this new mechanism. We continue on with some more German manufacturers. Here we have Johann Andreas Stein and Johann Andreas Streicher, and they came up with a hopper action. It's an escapement action. Around 1717 they developed this, and what makes it different from Silbermann's piano is that it's a separate escapement for each key. Their pianos were known for good tone, smooth action, and beautiful outward appearance. Mozart was actually a fan of the Streicher pianos. In a letter he wrote to his father in 1777, he talks about the precision of the instrument. He says that it's always even. His instruments have this special advantage over others that they are made with an escape action. He also kind of gives a shout out here to Streicher, saying that he's not in it just for the profit. He's working on these instruments for the interest of music. So he himself said, Streicher that is, said, if I were not myself such a passionate lover of music and had not myself some slight skill on the clavier, I should certainly long ago have lost patience with my work. So it's kind of nice that we have these letters from Mozart. He's actually documenting the evolution of the piano. He is a witness to this mechanism, you know, this instrument that's getting better and better as time goes on. Next we have some Viennese piano manufacturers, Anton Walter and J. Wenzel Schantz. Mozart was actually a fan of the Walter pianos, and he had one specially made for himself a little bit before 1784. And this piano here included leather-covered hammers, 5-octave range. The key color was reversed, kind of how we see on a harpsichord. What is a white key is a black key. What's a black key is a white key. There were knee pedals, and this helped with the una corda effect. And of course, the outside looked like a very fancy harpsichord. Joseph Haydn liked the Schantz piano, and he actually was recommending it for a friend of his. Here in some letters to a friend, Maria Anna von Genzinger, and he tells her that it's a pity that she doesn't have one of the Schantz forte pianos. And he claims here that everything is much more expressive on that instrument. Later, he writes her another letter, and I quote here, he's comparing, I believe, another piano maker to the Schantz, and he writes, I know Herr von Nickel's forte piano. It's excellent, but too heavy for your Grace's hand, and one can't play everything on it with the necessary delicacy. Therefore, I should like your Grace to try one made by Herr Schantz. His forte pianos are particularly light in touch, and the mechanism very agreeable. So as we can see, little by little, the piano is now becoming much more touch sensitive and more musical to play on. Finally, piano popularity is gaining the hype here. We have other manufacturers from different places jumping on the bandwagon, so to speak. Sebastian Erard and Pascal Taskin were from France, and in 1777 they began their company of manufacturing pianos. Joseph Haydn received an Erard piano in 1801, but he did say it was a little difficult to play on. John Brent is worth mentioning. He's an American manufacturer, and the first American piano was built in Philadelphia during this time. But we're going to go back to the German manufacturers was Johannes Zumpe, where he had made, he was gaining popularity with his pianos, as Johann Christian Bach was one of the first people to perform a pianoforte solo recital or solo concert in 1768. During this time also, sheet music was starting to change for the piano world, where essentially it used to say, you know, the music was for harpsichord and fortepiano, and finally they just kind of took off the harpsichord part and it was just for fortepiano. Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata was one of the first printed sheet music, that said just for fortepiano. This was in 1799. Haydn's Fantasy in C major, also exclusively composed for the piano, was meant to just be played on the piano. And here Carl Granger has a wonderful quote, the way he describes this. He says here, this Fantasia was written by a master who exploited the possibilities of piano technique in transcribing ideas of an essentially orchestral nature. So the piano is now becoming much more popular, not only as the instrument itself, but composers are wanting to now compose for that specific instrument. More developments included the square piano, which was manufactured by Zumpe, and he also was working with a Swiss harpsichord maker named Burkhard Schudy. There was another manufacturer, and this gentleman's name was John Broadwood, and he started working with Schudy as well. He ended up marrying the daughter of Schudy, and they had children, of course, and they initially had a company called Schudy and Broadwood, but by 1795 they changed the name to Broadwood and Sons, and now it's one of the oldest companies that's still in existence today for manufacturing pianos. But in 1780 they came up with a patent for the square piano, which included a damper pedal and an una corda pedal. As you can imagine, with the popularity of the instrument, these square pianos were now available for people to have in their homes. Beethoven also preferred this brand of piano, the Broadwood brand. These were much more sturdy and sonorous, and some of the things they included were 3 strings per note. The diameter of the strings was twice as great. The soundboard was thicker, and the hammers were heavier. So as you can imagine, this piano could probably take on more of Beethoven's later works than probably the first Cristofori piano could handle. In the early 1800s, the piano gained enormous popularity in Europe. not only because it was this new instrument, but I think also the composers of this time took full advantage of the new instrument and began composing specifically for the piano. Some of the capabilities were the larger dynamic range, the ability to phrase and do more shading in the classical style. There was mass production of the instrument as well. Apparently there was thousands of them being manufactured a year, less maintenance compared to the harpsichord, and the piano was appropriate for large concert halls. The harpsichord, though it was losing a little bit of speed here, it almost did disappear in 1814. The book states here that during the French Revolution, many harpsichords were confiscated and used as firewood during during the winter months. So who knows how many hundreds and hundreds of harpsichords were burned. The good news is that we still have existing music for harpsichord, thanks to the heroes, I call them, the composers here for the harpsichord. In particular, the book mentions Scarlatti, J.S. Bach, and C.P.E. Bach. And a lot of their music, of course, still exists for the harpsichord. And of course, the piano, we have our virtuosos here. The book mentions Mozart, Hummel, Clementi, and Beethoven as the first, or shall I say, founding fathers of pianoforte music. And they helped to make it more popular and more accessible, I'm thinking, for anyone to want to play this instrument. So it opened the door for Chopin and Liszt.